Welcome to Healing Minds, Stories of Resiliency and Recovery, a conversation held at the intersection of substance abuse, mental health, and everyday living. Your hosts, Marc and Justin Wolf, bring both professional expertise and personal understanding to the table. So welcome to the conversation. Let's dive in.
Well, hi, everybody, and welcome back to another episode here of Healing Minds, Stories of Resiliency and Recovery. I'm your host, Justin Wolf, and I'm joined by my co-host, Marc Regala. Marc, as always, pleasure to have you alongside me here. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good. I'm doing really good. Middle of September, hard to believe fall is around the corner. Halloween, Thanksgiving, Christmas on the horizon. Again, I don't know where the year has gone, Justin. I really don't.
Yeah, neither do I, but here we are in the middle of September, and I look at the camera, I go, wow, my skin is awfully red for it to be the middle of September right now. So, guess no matter what time of year it is, make sure you wear sunscreen, which obviously I do quite poorly at. But all joking aside, I think we got a great topic here to kind of dive into today, and I believe I'm joined by the perfect person here to kind of discuss this with and to kind of really divulge what Overdose Awareness Day is, what it means, and what it really kind of represents, and what we can do on our end to really try and shift the curve and help really save lives, because that's what this is all about at the end of the day, is really looking at addiction and substance use disorders. This is claiming the lives of people, significant numbers of individuals, that when you look at this statistic, and I mean, in 2023, like this past year, the data came out and they said, hey, we lost 107,543 people to overdose last year. And you look at that number, and obviously a lot of that number is being driven by fentanyl and opioids and the fentanyl analogs that are out there that are getting mixed in. And we're seeing, as we've discussed in previous podcasts, about fentanyl poisoning and these drugs being mixed in with the other drug supply and pressed pills, right? There's like this myriad of reasons why this number has continued to be at this staggering level. And when we look at that 107,543 this past year, that number actually went down from the previous year in 2022, when we had 111,029 deaths. And so you're looking at a decrease by 3%. I mean, a decrease is fantastic. It's moving in the right direction. And this number just screams, hey, as a society, as a whole, as a community, we can do more. We have the opportunity to really make an impact and really shift the curve of certain individuals' lives and help them really live, prosper, flourish, which we all have an innate nature to do when it comes to flourishing. But that's when this day is so powerful and it's so important. And so when we talk about like the history of it, and after we kind of talk a little bit about the history, Marc, I want to kind of get your personal thoughts on what this day means to you and what it represents, because this is a day that's pretty recent when we kind of look at when it came to be. I mean, this was started August 31st in 2001 in Melbourne, Australia. I mean, the following day, September 1st, is the beginning of National Recovery Month here. And so this day ties right in with that beautifully into a seamless, hey, we need to spread awareness. We need to acknowledge like the stigma that's still present in our society and our culture today about individuals who use substances and also interferes with them reaching out for help or showing up for services that can be life-saving. Really, that's what that entire following month is about. And obviously it shouldn't stop at the end of like September 31st. Like that day needs to keep going. It should be an ongoing effort within our communities, within our society. And so when we look at just what is this day, when we're talking about National Overdose Awareness Day, this is a time to acknowledge those who have lost loved ones to drug overdose and to recognize the ongoing efforts of people working towards recovery, while also using this as an opportunity to educate individuals about the disease of addiction, about substance use disorders, and to really spread awareness and hopefully drive action. And so, like I said, that's a little bit of the history, Mark, and we can kind of now dive into really kind of what does this day mean for you?
I mean, me personally, it's a range of emotions because I'm a survivor of multiple overdoses as a result of opiates. But at the same time, I've lost too many people to count to overdose addiction or to opiate addiction and overdoses. I mean, I couldn't even tell you the amount of people that I know, both personally and professionally, that did not survive their addictions. Um, it's about remembrance of the people that are no longer with us. It's about supporting people that are battling those types of addictions, trying to help them get into recovery. And it's about education about how addictive specifically these pain pills can be and what it could potentially lead to if you don't take them as prescribed. Again, with me, my issue started with a neck and back issue. A pain management doctor introduced me to prescription pain medicine, and I've never dealt with drugs. I was a drinker, but I never really dealt with drugs per se. I didn't view it as, I didn't know it was an opiate. I didn't know that it was a synthetic heroin in a bottle. I didn't know that it binds to your receptors of the brain, rewires the receptors of the brain, how addictive it could be. Again, I'll say it, and I've said this multiple times on podcasts. I had ignorance when it came to mental health, and I had ignorance when it came to, different types of medications. I've learned through this whole process. So it's about educating the general public about how addictive this stuff is and how quickly it can get out of control. I'm just turned 50 years old. My whole story, for the most part, happened over the age of 40. And I've been in recovery now for well over 4 years. So we're talking about a 4 to 5 year period in a 50-year-old man's life. But it was so destructive during that 4 to 5 years because I had no idea how addicted this stuff could be. So it's about remembrance. It's about, trying to provide hope and inspiration to those that are battling. And it's about providing education to the general public with the hopes that they're not going to go down that path with the proper education and understanding of how addictive this stuff can possibly be.
Right. And I think you just really hit on, and before I kind of go on, let me just acknowledge, just the gratitude and the fortune that we all have to kind of be blessed by you're still here with us, man. And so that is forever something that myself and many other people who come across and get to know you are as well. So, I mean, I think you just hit on a key thing here, though, where you're talking about that awareness piece, the education, spreading that information out there, because there's a lot of misinformation. A lot of people like to learn about what does a substance do and what's the impact of it by talking to their friends or people that they know, or doing a Google search and seeing what comes up, or following some Reddit forum. People don't take the time to really understand just how powerful and the risk associated with these drugs are. And on the flip side, there are people that do understand that and do recognize that. And now we're talking about, the intersection of where mental illness, in terms of just feeling that depression, that hopelessness, that helplessness, feeling lost, feeling, what's the point, kicks in. And it's what, I'm looking at this as my escape. Even though there's a possibility this might cost my life, right? I'm at least getting some temporary relief away from being me. And that's a very dangerous position to kind of put oneself in. And as I'm talking, I'm seeing you reacting, man. So love to hear what you're thinking.
Well, it's a very dangerous situation to put yourself in because, again, a lot of people don't realize that they have underlying issues, because of that ignorance and that stigma and things like that. And, a painkiller is a painkiller. I mean, it works good for physical pain, which is what it was being prescribed for my neck and back. But I learned really, really quick that as good as it works for physical pain, it works even better for emotional pain.
Right.
And if you got something going on the inside, it certainly made dealing with the stresses of life, whether it was anxiety, whether it was depression, whatever you're dealing with a heck of a lot easier. But at the same time, you don't realize how addictive and how out of control it can get, and so quickly how it can get out of control. A lot of people start abusing those things by just taking one or two extra pills, because they like the feel or they like the buzz or what have you. And before too long, they're either on the streets buying them because they're running through their prescriptions too quickly, or if they don't have the financial means to buy them on the streets, that's how a lot of people become full-blown heroin addicts, quite frankly. It usually starts with a prescription of a pain medicine or painkiller. A lot of people that are heroin addicts, and very few make it out of that addiction. And it all started with prescription pain medicine being prescribed for an actual medical issue that they got going on physically.
Yeah, I know. And as you're talking to me, I think you're really kind of hitting on like just the importance of like that awareness being raised, people getting the needed and necessary information in front of them, provided to them, so that they can make informed choices and be aware of what's going on. And I'm just kind of like, where do you think that would be powerful? Because I think a lot of times we try to do it on the front end in like these school assemblies, which can have a powerful impact when done and delivered well, or it's done in a health class, but that's only for like, a part of a unit. When it's, hey, for a week, we're going to talk about substance use in your entire school year. And that doesn't seem to have the impact or provide the necessary education or information that would be helpful in kind of combating this. What do you think is kind of missing the mark here? Where should we go with this?
Well, I think it's just as important to have education to the youth, or it's just as important as we give education to the youth that we give education to the adults.
Yeah.
And I think that's where it's got to start, because it's got to be driven at home, with the parents, having those conversations with kids. But then the parents also have to be educated, because I know a lot of households that have been destroyed, including mine, because of that ignorance. So where does it start? I mean, it could be as simple as programs through your employer, mental health forums through your employer, which I know some employers are doing now in 2024, talking about, the issues with addictions, specific addictions to different types of things. And, the opioid crisis has obviously gotten a lot of attention. But I don't think a lot of people realize like where the origins typically come from. I still think that people are judgmental. I mean, they see somebody who's a heroin addict on the street and they're very judgmental of that individual, not realizing that it started very innocently because they had a physical injury and a doctor was prescribing that medication, and that medication is so addictive that it led them down that path, where they actually had to go buy street drugs, to because their brains were rewired and so forth. Podcasts, social media. I mean, there's forums out there to get the information out there. The sad part about it, though, is, you put something so informative out there and it doesn't get a lot of views or a lot of likes or what have you, but you put something funny out there, like a joke or a skit or whatever it might be, and it's going to go viral in a matter of seconds. And the sad part about it is what we're talking about here literally is life or death, and it could actually lead to multiple generations in a household possibly being affected because one of the parents, goes down that path because they're a blue collar laborer and they have a back issue and they get introduced to pain medicine and they became an opiate addict and they can't beat it, and all the harm and PTSD and trauma that it causes to their children and their spouse and everybody in that household.
Right. No, I mean, that's the thing where it's like you look at just how this has infiltrated our society and our culture. I mean, the opioid epidemic as a whole has already claimed more lives than World War I and World War II combined.
Yeah.
And this is something that when you kind of go and like when I do presentations at places or just have conversation, it's like you ask the crowd or just the group you're with, and you're like, hey, who's been impacted directly by the opioid epidemic? And without a doubt, almost everybody's hand always shoots up.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I mean, this is something that's touching every household, every community. And the people that like I've also watched and seen be directly impacted are like the children. When you're talking like that older, a little bit older demographic, which I'm almost falling into it, right? So I'll hold on to it as long as I can, man. You don't know. But like I hear from these kids or these young adults, like, hey, this is how I found my dad. And he was slumped over in the bathroom and I had to smack him, make sure he was alive. Or else I knew where to find the Narcan. Like,
Yeah.
and it's just heartbreaking because it's like you look at what has been the cost, right, of this epidemic that's been ravaging our culture. You're talking about this isn't just like people who are bad. And we're talking about stigma now, right? Let's just talk about this stigma attached with individuals who have substance use disorders that have been perpetuated throughout, endless time from the days of like, don't do drugs, just say no because, it's that simple. God, like somebody should have given somebody a skit that says, hey, here you go. And then we all would have been saved. But the reality is like you're talking about the stigma that is being perceived as individuals who are using or who have used, are obviously lacking something and they're not as well equipped when you're looking at a disease that hijacks the brain.
Yeah.
And overrides and kind of goes to the top of the list is like, this is the most important thing right now in my world. I don't care what the cost is because I'll deal with all that later. All I'm focused on is this right now. And I'll run through this freaking wall if I got to run through this wall. If that's what it means, I'm going to get what I need to get. And we'll worry about the damage tomorrow.
Yeah. I mean, you really can't fathom how sick you can get off the stuff. Mm-hmm. I mean, it got to the point with me where, I was running through my prescriptions fairly quickly. I remember the first form of withdrawals that I had, which was a very mild form of withdrawal. I remember where and when I was able to get some pills from an individual on the streets. And this is before the fentanyl crisis. Now you score pills on the streets. You don't even know if they're legit or not. You could be getting fentanyl and be dying after taking one pill. And I think that's important to understand.
Yeah.
Very important to understand. But back then, I remember that. And then I remember the addiction just getting so out of control, taking ungodly amounts first thing in the morning. Well, I'd wake up and I would be physically sick. And I either would have to ingest a number of pills, choke them down, sit in a chair, not vomit them up, wait about 10 or 15 minutes, they kick in, and then I started feeling normal, and then I can actually start my day. Or I'd have to set up a deal the night before, know I'm going through withdrawals in the morning, drive up the expressway with a jewel bag in my car, literally vomiting while I'm driving to try to pick up the pills and praying that the person left them where they said they were going to leave them, and grab them, go sit in the parking lot, choke them down, try not to vomit them up, and then wait 15 minutes, and then boom, you got your fix and you're ready to start your workday. It's like being trapped in a prison.
Right.
My words don't give it justice. Being sick every single day for a period of time with the flu times 50, it's absolutely pure hell. It's by far the hardest thing I've ever had to go through. And that's why a lot of people, unfortunately, don't make it out of it. Out of all the people that I know that were in active addiction, and all the people that I know that were in active addiction didn't set out to become a heroin addict. They didn't set out to be a quote unquote junkie. It literally started with the prescription from a doctor. But out of all the people that I know that were in active addiction, as far as I know, there's only two people living. Me and a gentleman who's doing time in Cook County Jail. And by the grace of God, I survived multiple overdoses. I probably should have been dead 100 times over. I can't explain why I'm still here. But we start talking about, trying to help others recover. If it wasn't for a gentleman speaking at the hospital, the very last time that I was found overdosed, I don't know if if I ever would have gotten out of it. And that gentleman was a speaker from NAMI, and that's why I partnered with NAMI, try to pay it forward. That gentleman, again, had street credit. He told me exactly what I needed to do, and He spoke in a language that I understood. It was like a foreign language to people that aren't part of that life, but I completely understood what he was talking about. And at that point, he was the only person I knew that was able to pull out of it. So everything that that man told me to do, I did. I listened because, in my opinion, he had the credentials. And I've had success. I've had a lot of success helping people get off of opiate painkillers. I've had a lot of success, getting people off of fentanyl that have accepted my help.
Yeah.
Again, there's people that have chosen not to accept my help. I think that the danger is now is not necessarily, it's still the pain pills from the doctor. I shouldn't say not necessarily, but it's this fentanyl crisis that's going on out there right now because that's 50 times stronger than heroin. And you got the counterfeit pills, and they're sprinkling it in other drugs, and you get people who aren't used to taking an opiate, ingesting or taking an opiate, snorting an opiate, and it is so powerful that literally you don't even know what the hell hit you, and you can be gone in a matter of seconds.
Right.
When I overdosed, the times that I overdosed, I had an extremely high tolerance, and I still overdosed. So if my body wasn't used to taking certain quantities, I probably would have. There's no way I would have survived.
Yeah.
There's no way I would have survived. So this day is special. This day is near and dear to my heart. There's a range of emotions. You start talking about, the damage caused to the children in the household. Again, I think it's pretty well documented. I got strained relationships with my kids. Pretty much haven't talked to me in 6 years. I got grandkids that have never spoken to me or never met. For babies, so that as far as I know, they don't speak. Maybe they're saying a few words now, but I've never met them. Because I put my children through so much trauma with my behavior and them finding me kind of like what you described, passed out and things like that. But, I'll say it again. It's kind of a tough topic for me to talk about, but
Yeah.
I didn't set out to be a drug addict.
Right.
I was doing what a doctor told me to do. At the end of the day, did I take an extra one or two because I like to feel? Yes. Not even have any idea what the potential consequences could be. It was very, very, very innocent. And that's what I speak about, when I talk and try to provide awareness, is just how dangerous this stuff is and how it literally is life or death. And now how dangerous other drugs are, with this whole fentanyl thing. At the end of the day, I was a fentanyl addict. I never did street heroin. I never did street fentanyl, but it was all prescribed medications. But it got to the point where my tolerance was so high that, if I didn't have stronger medications that I would buy from the streets, no matter what I put in my body, I was still sick. So I was addicted to basically fentanyl patches that they were giving to cancer patients for end of life.
Yeah.
And they put them on their body, and it's supposed to be 72 hours of pain management or pain treatment. I would put those friggin' things in my mouth and chew them like a piece of gum, be higher than a kite, and walk around like nothing was going on. In the meantime, you're getting more addicted. Your brain's getting more rewired. Your body's building a higher tolerance, and coming off that stuff was just absolutely ridiculous. Again, hardest thing I've ever had to do. At the end of the day, when my sister found me in my parents' kitchen, and the Uber driver called 911. She was trying to find the Narcan. My parents were nowhere around. My mom, she called my mom. My mom was trying to describe where the Narcan was because it wasn't my first overdose. And as she's scrambling trying to find it, the police and the paramedics are actually walking in because my Uber driver called 911. And thank God that he did, because they found me on the floor. They Narcaned me a couple of times and wheeled me out. And I was in intensive care for a few days before they set me down to psychiatric treatment and eventually my last stint in substance use treatment.
Yeah.
So, I guess that's the point I want to make, is that I didn't set out to be a drug addict. It happened. And I think that's what happens with people. And I can't stand it when people are sitting there talking about the quote unquote junkie on the corner, because you don't know what the hell happened in that man's life or a woman's life to put them in that particular position.
Mhm.
And I think that's important to understand. And, you know, instead of talking about them, you know, if we go there, go to them and try to help them and lend a hand and show them that there's a way to get out of this life.
Yeah.
That's what this day is all about. You know, I'm happy that we're down 3% on overdoses, but we still lost 107,000 people last year.
Right.
You know, that number has got to go down considerably. And it's doing podcasts like this, it's community education, me speaking at the hospitals. I spoke at an opioid awareness event in Naperville with the DuPage County Sheriff and the gentleman that runs the DuPage County Health Department. You know, doing things like that as much as we possibly can, that's going to help drive down those numbers even more. But we all have a lot of work to do as a society. And it starts with really ending the stigma, being less judgmental, and, you know, let's lend our fellow brother or fellow sister a helping hand.
Definitely. No, Mark, I feel like every time you share your story and parts of your story, like it's just it's another beacon of just like, hey, there is hope. No matter like on your darkest day, individuals, when you're talking about like the stigma component, like, yes, I may be struggling with my addiction, and many individuals do recover, and there is hope. And I think that's part of this message on this day too, is, well, we honor those that we lost, and let alone, hey, like there's somebody like that I know who unfortunately was claimed by this disease, who shared with me one time. He's like, look, like, you don't know what it's like every day to live in my skin. And being awake and getting through the day, that just becomes the goal. I just need to get through this day. I'm not worried about my future. I just got to get through this day. And I just remember that because it stuck with me about, hey, when we're talking about this, you're talking like the stigma, like nobody's out there having a good time when it gets to this position. And like when you're sharing your story about what you had to do to kind of make sure that you weren't sick and just to fight off getting sick, like none of that story sounded like, oh, he's out there having a good time. But that's a lot of times where people are just like, they're self-centered. They just are trying to, no, like this is the disease and it's hijacked the brain and it's pushed us in directions that nobody would have ever thought or planned for, because nobody ever sees it getting to that point.
You know, you're trying to support your family. You got a career. You got sales reps underneath you that are dependent of you. I mean, we've talked about this before too. You know, you have a lot of responsibilities. You can't afford to be sick. You know, so you're doing what you can to get through the day. But I will say this, and I do want to make sure I make this point. Yes, I've lost a lot of people to overdoses. Yes, in that circle that I ran with, okay, that I knew, as far as I know, there was only two people living, one me and the other person in Cook County Jail. But also understand, we were in active addiction. We didn't understand what was going on. We didn't understand mental health. You know, I didn't have the knowledge that I have today. Fast forward, I am a believer that as long as there's a pulse, there's hope.
Right.
Because doing the work that I've done inside the community, I have seen some miraculous turnarounds. And I consider myself being a miraculous turnaround. You know, one of them is the gentleman we had on the podcast, you know, back a couple months ago, Ted.
Yep.
You know, he was a fentanyl addict. Okay. But I took the knowledge that I learned. I recognized all the signs. And, you know, that show that night, there were people the next table over making fun of him and laughing because he was really off his rails that night. It was kind of bothering me because I knew exactly what was going on. And that's why I walked up to him and said, listen, you had an off night, but I know exactly what's going on. Here's my name and number. And whether he accepted my help or not, you know, that was up to him. But he called me the next day. And that was a hell of a process, but that was a miraculous turnaround.
Right.
You know, so, you know, if there's a pulse, there's hope with proper guidance, proper education, okay, and effort, you know, being put in on a daily basis.
Definitely.
And I think that's important to understand.
Yeah, no, and I think those are the critical components here as well. Is like, hey, this is also a time where we really take a moment to really honor and acknowledge those that we have lost to the disease, because their disease doesn't define who they are as people. And sometimes that's how it gets portrayed. And that's the thing that's like, hey, like this was the battle they were caught in versus, hey, this is the person they are. And this is what really mattered. And this is what they stood for. And this is how we want to kind of carry on and honor their memory in what we do moving forward and how we speak about them and how we discuss them and what we do to recognize and acknowledge that, hey, even though physically they may not still be here, we still carry them with us and very near and dear to our heart. And they are forever imprinted on us. And that we're grateful for the time that we had on this earth with them. Because you know what? Like, even though their time came, that battle that they were in, that inner battle that most likely they didn't share the depths of that fight that they were caught up in on a day in and day out basis. There could have been some extra days that were kind of tacked on there at the end because of just the energy and effort and the care and support that they had with those that were present still with them in their lives. And so I just think it's just so important that we never lose sight. Like, hey, these are people. This is a person first. And that this doesn't define, but this is also that moment to honor those that we have lost. And
absolutely. A lot of good people. That's all I can tell you. A lot of good people. You know, contrary to what the stigma is out there in that, a lot of good people that would give you the shirt off their back and people you want to go to war with. They would always be loyal to you. That's all I can tell you.
Exactly.
And I think of them often. I mean, I do. I think of them often. I wish I had the knowledge back then that I have now to try to help them. There's nothing I can do about that. All I can do is focus on today moving forward and try to make as big of an impact on society as I possibly can. That's what I try to do every day, man.
Love it. Well, as always, Marc, it is a pleasure doing these podcasts with you and just hearing the wisdom that you carry and share here. And so we appreciate everybody tuning in to these podcasts that we're sharing. And these discussions will air on the 15th and the 30th of each month. So feel free to tune in. As always, Marc and I are open to comments or suggestions or anything else that you would like to see us really dive into and discuss. Those can be sent at namidupage.org/podcast. And we will be happy to kind of incorporate that into our programming here. So as always, everybody, thank you for your time. We appreciate your commitment to being a part of these podcasts with Marc and myself. And as always, you take care and we will catch you on the next episode.
Thanks for joining us today on Healing Minds, Stories of Resiliency and Recovery. If you're on the journey to find guidance and insights, subscribe now wherever you find your podcasts. Healing Minds, Stories of Resiliency and Recovery is an educational resource, not a substitute for medical or therapeutic advice. The opinions expressed by the hosts and their guests are not necessarily those of NAMI DuPage. Go to namidupage.org/podcast for links to past episodes, show notes, and to submit a question or topic ideas for a future episode. Until next time, be well.